Hi there, my name is Naveen Saleh. I'm the Communications Manager at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. Today I'm going to be chatting with you about developing a communication strategy. So why is it important for you to do so? Why do we want to go ahead and create some kind of communications plan when we're, about to launch something or putting together a project or a report? Um, Well, the truth is, the idea behind a communication strategy is to give you a chance to think of your plan as a roadmap. You know where you want to go, but you need to kind of plan the route of how to get there. And that communication strategy or the communications plan is your route. During this presentation, what we're going to do is go through how to kind of build a full communications plan. We'll be sharing a template with you as well that we use at the observatory for all our communication launches. And the idea behind it is you kind of get more of a hands-on practical approach into using that tool and how to think about it when you're about to launch your own project. So the communication strategy is a cohesive plan. It's supposed to help you deliver a very specific set of information to a specific audience. Depending on what your rationale is, that goes back to your objectives within a limited time frame, and being a not-for-profit in our case with very finite resources. Um, the This is kind of the process in action. You get a chance to see our communication launch plan. You'll see we set out the dates. We think about it in two ways, in a very digital way, but we also think about it in print. So you'll see that we include things like web pages, URLs, hashtags, handles, and in that we sort of start plugging in our content. The overview is your idea of kind of like big picture. What do I want to, what does my event or project entail? Think of it in like very macro basis. Your key messages, and I think for me in communications, but also in general, it's a kind of an idea of pulling all your content in one place. So the cool part about this is you get to kind of plug in the takeaways. So this is the bread and butter of your communications plan, because you'll pull a lot of things like potential content for, maybe you want to write a blog about it, or maybe you want to draft some press releases or social media messages. However, your tools that you're going to end up using, essentially a lot of them will come out of the key messages. So this is where I would spend the most time into really pulling out what those messages are. And of course, your timelines. Be realistic with yourself. Add some cushioning. And of course, in our case, we kind of do everything in-house. We do the design. We do, drafting, content, a lot of it happens in-house. So we try and include all those and work back. So what's our launch date? That's our launch date, is in this example is March 30th. So we work our way back, adding in the dates. And that's kind of our approach. I think that the key thing is for us, when you're thinking about your overview and your key messages and what your key messages would be, it's identifying the difference between data and information. When it's just data, it feels like a lot of noise. It's not easy to absorb data without a narrative. The narrative gives it context. So you got to figure out how to turn a lot of these features or ideas or benefits, whatever it is that you're looking to kind of promote, into a story. So it becomes information. And with that, you try and set a call to action. So whether you want folks to, sign a campaign, or you want them to download a report or read it, whatever it is your call to action, you want to include that in there as well. And you want to try and do a good job of developing the empathy to turn all that data that you've assembled into a story that folks can understand. Because a lot of times data on its own kind of can feel stark. And if you don't add the story, a lot of people aren't able to empathize with what you're trying to say. So the importance of setting the plan helps you kind of consider the who, what, where, why, and when, and why that's important. Ideally, going through this whole communication planning process is going to help you identify all those things, like who do you need to reach? What does the reader need to know? You'll find that, for example, that your timeline might change because as you set out who it is that's going to be involved, for example, other stakeholders, those might be new considerations. This is why setting the plan is so important. The next step then will be communicating goals and objectives. So for us, the goals are, generating awareness, or maybe you want them to engage with key folks in your particular sector to try and get them to mobilize with you. It might be, some kind of policy window that you want to capitalize on. Whatever it is, those goals, then you can outline into objectives. So if you want to generate awareness, well, how do you want to do that? The objective would be, well, we want to get folks in healthcare to read our report, or we want to generate this knowledge and share it with people in our organization. You want maybe to shine a spotlight on people who are experiencing homelessness, for example, who live in a particular geography. Whatever it is that you're trying to do, ideally you kind of outline it in here. What this potentially will help you do is you look at that big picture and you can start to distill as you set your objectives. So the goal is, again, kind of divided into two ways, kind of like our overview and key messages. You've got big picture in your goal, and your objectives is the intended outcomes. So this, you hone in on what you really want to get done there. Then you've got your tools. So for us, and I'm sure, you use very similar tools yourself, we've got print, and we've got tradition, which is considered traditional media, and we've also got digital media. That includes social media, our websites, etc. So for us, we try and layer those tools together to kind of create a more comprehensive approach. As you try and figure out, what those particular activities and channels will be, going through this communication plan will help you kind of discover what are the most effective ways to communicate with people that you're trying to reach, and what are the tools that you'd like to use, so that it allows you, I think, in a way to focus your efforts, and you can spread your message in different ways without feeling like you are being pulled in different directions. And I think that's really important. So I think layering allows you to do that. But if you take the time to lay out a plan, then you won't feel like you're kind of running around like a headless chicken. So in our case, social media, we use Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram as our channels. We try and plug in what we want to put on those messages. And we also try and tailor our messages to those respective channels. We also have a blog on our website, thehomelesshub.ca. Folks can include multiple blogs sometimes, or sometimes they choose not to, but this is just an example to show for you guys what we plug in. Shorter papers, sometimes if we are submitting a larger report, folks will choose to do a shorter report so that the information is accessible and distilled in a shorter way. And of course, we've got our weekly Hub newsletter, which we publish a lot of, or link a lot of our publications or our launches through. But I think the most important part, sort of tie in as we talk about these tools, is to use plain language. You want to write to everyone who would be interested in your topic, not just the folks who are content experts or who are knowledgeable about this, because sometimes even experts want something that's clear and that is easy to follow. So, for example, no coordinates exist like one's domicile. There's no place like home. I think for us, something simple and letting folks know about how to understand your content in a clear way is an asset, and we want to make sure that at the very least that content is very clear. How do folks get information? I think the way people receive and absorb information is shaped by a few things: their personal preferences and habits. Of course, their literacy levels, everyone's, at different points. And of course, their level of knowledge about the issue that you're posing. So I think this goes back to the earlier kind of mention of the layering. You need to use a variety of formats and channels to get your information out and to make sure that you're reaching folks at, different points and different levels of engagement with the content. So what kind of tools? I think in general, tools and channels have got to fit your message and your audience. So think about that as you set your plan. And that's why this is so great, is you kind of start to recognize your message, who you're trying to reach, who your audience will be. A lot of the tools will respond to that. I think for us, it's really important at the COH that our message has a lot of understanding of folks' cultural context, of where people are coming from when they read our messages. And for us is also equally key is that we democratize knowledge. We bring together a variety of audience members through our layering tool by making it accessible, but also making sure that it's easy to reach. For us at the COH, a lot of our reports are, based in research, but we still continue to use really clear language, really clear and easy to use platforms so that they can reach our message and they can reach our research as easily as possible. So figuring out the tools really goes back to you trying to figure out your message and who your audience potentially would be. Which takes us to the perfect place, your target audience. For us, this is again example at the COH, we plugged in who we think are key folks that would read our content. So for example, the homelessness sector, that would include national organizations, community agencies, different community-focused youth serving, for example, agencies. Other sectors, could be government, various provincial and federal, or maybe municipal, depending on what the content is. Of course, the general public. We are always looking to engage with people who are interested in our content, just whether out of their own activism or, advocacy efforts, or just for general knowledge. And of course, like I said, all levels of government, depending on what the focus is. And we include different tools. So as you can see in the description section, for example, levels of government, sometimes they might not always engage on social media. So we've included the personalized letter for general public. A lot of them engage via social media, and they enjoy kind of reading the short excerpts. So we know that the blogs or an op-ed would work really well. We also get quite a bit of traffic visiting our website. For other stakeholders or partner agencies, we kind of, it's much more open. So a lot of them are subscribers to our newsletter, so they'll be able to read it there. Social media, as we all follow each other, or maybe a webinar. So this is where, we kind of set a presentation together where folks in the sector can come in and engage with our content, more kind of concentrated dose. So it's really important to know your audience. I think of, in our case for our reports, we think of why the reader needs to read our report. What is it that they want to get out of it? And this kind of ties back to your key messages. As you consider your key messages, consider your audience. Keep in mind, like we said earlier, keep in mind the average reader's level of expertise in your area, their level of understanding, and make sure that, as you narrow down the pool of folks you want to introduce to your content or your project, what does that mean for you in terms of the tools that you're going to use to disseminate your information? So for us at the COH, we've got a very broad spectrum. We've got people with lived experience, we've got policymakers, other researchers, of course, media and news, we've got students, the general public, teachers, and of course, folks on the front line, such as service providers in shelters, etc. So our audience pool is quite diverse, which is where making sure that we know for each project who our audiences kind of helps us narrow this pool down a little bit and helps us make sure that we are engaging with the right people for the right content. So things to kind of consider as you think about your audience. Like, what do they know already about the subject? So where should I start? Do I start from the beginner level, like back to basics, or do I give folks a little bit more time? What does my audience need to know? So what are the key messages? Again, this kind of hammers home what I said at the beginning of the presentation, is that your key messages are your bread and butter. So they're really the core of your plan. What questions do you anticipate that they're going to have about your content? So kind of put yourself in their shoes and read something as if they would read it for the first time. Is there something missing? Do they need that context? Have you hashed out your story well enough so that they get your data? What needs to be emphasized? So this is like the takeaway. If you had to, and you will if you decide to take the social media approach, like using Twitter, if you need to distill it to 280 characters and you want this to be the key thing that you need emphasized, what would that be? So think about that as well, as you ask yourself in terms of, your content and your key messages, and basically what you'd like your audience to take away. And think about what your audience will be doing. Are you asking them to implement a new technique or a practice? Or is it just kind of a learning thing? I think what this question really asks is, what do you want them to do with the content? So once you've given it to them, where do you go next? And I think that's really important because that's your call to action, right? This is where the next step. So you're putting out your content. What do you want them to do with it? What do you hope for them to do with it? Give people the answer. Not everyone's gonna do as you say, but it's nice of you to kind of like guide your audience in that way. Tactics. So you want to address each audience with 2 to 3 tactics. So once you've kind of honed in on your pool of audience members, you want to kind of see what tactic works. And just as we did with our earlier, when we kind of put out the key sectors and in the description where we plugged in who we think is going to do what. So reaching government through letters, etc. That's what this means. You want to kind of figure out what approach you're going to take for which audience. So if you see that you aren't really addressing all of your key audiences in one tactic or two, go back and see how you can. Ideally, you want to layer, but also you don't want to layer in such a way where, like we said earlier, where you have to pull yourself in different directions. You want to clarify the process. You want to make it easy to follow and make sure that you're, going through the process and not being pulled in different directions. And of course, lastly is timelines. Like we said earlier, I think it's really key to do a few things. Give yourself some cushioning, make sure you work back from your launches, and give yourself time for review and revision. We always plug in some time after we design something to kind of give ourselves a bit of a buffer. And whether it's going back to the authors or whether it's sharing it with other colleagues, make sure you have folks that you can go back to kind of have another set of eyes to be able to say, hey, like, what do you think? Does this look good? Is this something that you'd be interested in reading? Do you understand what I'm trying to say or convey in this message? We are a highly collaborative team here, and we see it as an opportunity to only improve ourselves. So I think it's always great to have as many eyes as possible on the work, to try, especially if it's hitting the public, to make sure that nobody misses anything. That's the end of this presentation. I hope you had an opportunity to kind of look through what we do at the observatory and how we set out our plans. And of course, I think in the end, the idea behind this is to give you a chance to see and lay out potential projects that you're going to do, and getting involved in the process and integrating folks into it, I think is going to give your teammates or colleagues a great sense of ownership in these projects. We always share that file. We actually have it on a Google Doc, and we share it with the authors and with other folks on the communications team, and we all are able to kind of plug in what at different parts and work together and collaborate together on building a communication plan that reflects the work. So, when you go through this process and you identify these strategies that work well for you, you'll find as you go through this communication plan, you're gonna communicate them more effectively. And it's just gonna be a much cleaner and more precise process, and you don't feel like overwhelmed by having to figure all that out. I think the communication strategy just allows you to ask questions that you might not be asked during the writing process or during the research process. And when you're hitting that point and you're ready to disseminate the knowledge, this process hopefully will allow you to do that, and you can capture some really important thoughts. Anyways, I hope you enjoy this, and let us know what you think. You're welcome to reach out to us with any questions.